Welcome to RICO 12. I'm Justin B., your host, and a child of an all-powerful and perfectly loving God, and an addict living in the miracle of recovery, one day at a time. RICO 12 is an open to all addictions and afflictions organization. We're dedicated to exploring the common threads of the differing manifestations of alcoholism and Anonism, sharing tools and offering hope from those walking a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and locations to learn and support one another. Our speakers come from various fellowships and experiences, demonstrating the universal principles of recovery. RICO 12 is not allied or affiliated with any specific 12-step fellowship. This is RICO 12 meeting number 378. Thank you for joining us live or on the recording later. Today's speaker is Matt D., who's spoken with us before a few times, and grateful to have him here with us. I appreciate his recovery work and networking for RICO 12, and I'm so grateful to hear from him today. His talk today is entitled, "My Wife's Sexaholism is the Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me," and I look forward to hearing more about this message in a few minutes. But first, a few quick announcements. RICO 12 offers a variety of recovery resources, including podcasts and social media communities. To explore more, please visit RICO12.com. That's RECO12.com. Or check the chat and show notes for links. Recently, we launched a new podcast that I talked about in the pre-recording, but I'm going to mention it here, called RICO 12 Workshops. This is a platform where former and current RICO 12 speakers who have recorded workshops or other talks in other meetings can share those recordings with RICO 12 and have them put up as a podcast. The link will be in the chat and the show notes if you'd like to check that out, or if you have some recordings to submit, we'd be happy to put those in there. RICO 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue this message. Thank you to all our spearhead donors, past and present. Excuse me. If you feel your higher power nudging you to make a contribution to RICO 12, the information on how to do that, I'll post it in the chat, I'll post it in the show notes of the podcast, and on the website at RICO12.com/support. Your support, both financially and by word of mouth, truly makes a difference in helping us share these messages of hope and recovery. Each week, we receive light and inspiration from our speakers. Their experience brings hope, meaning, worth, and growth to us as listeners. Now I'm going to welcome today's guest speaker, Matt D., and just read his bio here real quick and turn the floor over to him in just a second. Matt spent the better part of a decade in an obsession that took him to some very dark places. Fueled by alcohol and drugs, he determined to find evidence of his wife's infidelity, driving himself insane in the process. Through the principles he learned in S-Anon, specifically with the help of a growing and thriving group of men in the program, he learned that although his wife's disease was a problem, it wasn't his problem, that his serenity was contingent upon the remission of his own chronic disease. He worked the steps aggressively, and within 3 months he was surprised to discover he was living the life that he'd always prayed God would give him. Now, 4 years into the program, he can say without reservation that his wife's sexaholism is the best thing that has ever happened to him. And I'm excited to hear about this. Matt, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. Ever since I was a kid, I've been hoping that I would have a floor. All right, not a good joke. Okay, guys. Thanks, Justin. What's up, family? I'm Matt D. from St. Louis. I'm a member of S-Anon, have been so since December 4th, 2021. It's good for me to be here today. You know, it tends to be that members of S-Anon are in the program due to the sexaholic behavior of a spouse, although that's not always the case. Some of us work the program because of the sexaholic behavior of a child, a coworker, a friend, etc. But for those of us in the program because of a spouse's behavior, it's not likely that we experienced adult onset anonism. In other words, our anonic behavior tends to have begun very early in our lives as response to traumatic experiences. On page 126 of our Green Book, we read, whether or not we were exposed to sexaholism as children, most of us think that we acquired some unhealthy beliefs about ourselves very early in our lives. And as we grow to adulthood, our response to these unhealthy beliefs often manifests as controlling, managing, fixing, or as I like to say, troubleshooting. The earliest memory that I can conjure wherein I displayed this type of behavior was when my father left my mother. I was 5 or so shortly after I entered kindergarten, I believe. I remember being in the basement watching my father pack up some electronics, some of his records and milk crates. I remember him being very angry and my mother being very sad, sobbing, begging him not to leave. And this was a problem for me because my mother was sad and I didn't like how that made me feel. But the solution to this was very simple for the 5-year-old Matt D. My mother was sad because she didn't have a husband anymore, so I thought I'd fix it by finding her another one. The only man that I knew of who might qualify for that position was my kindergarten teacher, Mr. B. My plan was simple. I told Mr. B that my mom was extending an invitation for him to come over on a Saturday for a picnic. And I didn't tell my mom I was doing it. Both he and her were discovering my motives when Mr. B showed up on my doorstep, greeted by my very confused and very surprised mother. My mother would eventually marry, but it wasn't to Mr. B. For a few years after my parents' divorce, my brothers, plural, and I, would spend most weekends at my father's house as part of the custody arrangement. It was just the boys, never the girls. It wasn't until my father went to prison when I was about 10 that I realized why my sisters never went to my father's with us. And there's quite a bit more of that kind of thing in my family of origin story, which we don't have time to delve into. But I'll just say that sexaholism in general and incest in particular was alive and well in the D household. It wasn't exclusive to my father. Among my family members, sexaholism is the rule, not the exception. The older I got, the more aware of it I became. It wasn't exactly a secret. We all knew what was going on, but nobody really talked about it. And so it just became sort of not that big a deal. I was the middle child of 12, now living in a blended family after my mother remarried. I was my mother's favorite, and my siblings were resentful of that fact. I was given special rewards for good behavior. And when I did get into trouble, my punishments were markedly more lenient than those of my siblings. And so while I was my mother's favorite, I was nobody else's. With no intended reference to a movie that was popular at the time, my siblings resentfully referred to me as the good son. And so having been sanctified by my mother and thus rejected by my siblings, I eventually stopped trying to fit in with them or anyone else for that matter. Having discovered that it was less emotionally taxing just to isolate. I was sometimes lonely because of that, but it just wasn't worth the hassle of trying to gain acceptance among family members or peers that I didn't really like all that much anyway. My sense of exclusion grew stronger during adolescence, of course. And by my senior year in high school, I was no longer willing to live the life that I had inherited. But I was ready to find my own way. And so the day that I turned 18, I withdrew myself from high school. I hopped on a bus and I rode it as far away as a $59 ticket would take me. And this turned out to be San Francisco, where I met my first serious girlfriend, who I would later find out was an up-and-coming sexaholic. So within this relationship that I began learning the fine art of snooping, hacking her email in order to monitor conversations between her and her internet boyfriends, plural. My second serious relationship was when I was 22. It was the same thing, sexaholic. She cheated on me multiple times. I hacked her email. I listened to her voicemails while she was sleeping. I copied her contacts into my phone under fake names. And I began experimenting with stalking her and her other boyfriends, plural. 2 years later, at 24 years old, I met the woman whom I have now been married to for nearly 20 years by God's grace. And wouldn't you know it, she was a sexaholic too. I got the darndest luck, y'all. At the time, I believed her to be the solution to all of my problems. So I proposed immediately, and within a year, we were married and we had a son. it was during our fifth year of marriage that I became aware of some of her acting out, when in 2010 I had the impulse to go through her phone. I don't remember anything in particular having occurred to motivate that. I'd never done that before in this relationship anyway. My disease, I guess, had just followed me into the marriage. But while I was looking through her phone, I found conversations with the man that she had been having a virtual affair with for a few years. I remember confronting her, although I don't remember precisely how that went. I don't think I acted crazy. I think I was just like, what the hell is this? And she was like, eh. And I was like, eh. And we were like, eh. And that was that. She made no attempt to make it seem like it was anything other than what I knew it to be. There was no sidestepping, no gaslighting, no attempts to explain it away. She admitted to what had been happening and promised to end it. And I pretended like it never happened. My insanity really began to take hold after someone very close to me flew into St. Louis for a visit in November 2012. He and I started drinking early that morning. Stories always end well when you start drinking in the morning. We started drinking early that morning, continuing on into the evening when my wife would join the festivities. After a few hours, I went to bed and left the two of them drinking and chatting in the garage. And then the next morning was Sunday. And like my wife and I did every week, we went to church, this time bringing this guy along with us. As I backed down my driveway, I was looking in the rear view, and I caught a look between my wife in the front seat and this guy in the back. And at the time, it registered as odd, but that's all I could make of it, and I dismissed it pretty quickly. That would have been the end of it, except for he flew home that evening and ghosted me. And despite probably a dozen attempts to communicate with him, he didn't speak to me for about a year. And during that time, the memory of this strange glance in the mirror kept returning to me, and intuition told me it was more than what it initially seemed to be. It was more than just odd. I questioned my wife about that night more than a few times over the next year or so, and eventually she did come clean about what amounted to a relatively minor indiscretion. She promised nothing like that had ever happened before, and nothing like it would ever happen again. Both statements were lies, neither of which I believed. But the incident itself served as the impetus for my detective work and the beginning of a 10-year descent into insanity. During those 10 years, there was not a document that she could author, a file that she could save, a post-it note she could discard, a calendar date she could pencil in, an email she could send, or a social media account that she could post to that I hadn't already read or actively been monitoring. If I found any usable information via those means, I relentlessly interrogated her about it. And if those sources dried up and left me without any new information, I relentlessly interrogated her anyway. During that time, I had compiled several binders worth of sorted, categorized, cataloged evidence. Most of this evidence was circumstantial, subject to interpretation, or otherwise missing some contextual component. Together, it was enough to arouse reasonable suspicion, but I had to admit it was inconclusive.
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M. and me, Justin B., on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M., streaming now on your favorite podcast platform.
With nothing definitive to show for a decade of obsession. I started to wonder if maybe there wasn't anything to find, if maybe she was telling the truth, maybe I was imagining things. And that's what you want, right? If you think that your wife is cheating on you, you want to have made a colossal mistake. You want to be all the way wrong about it. But I found myself not wanting to be wrong, but right. Why? Because at that point, being wrong meant that I was unstable, that I had lost touch with reality, and that I had been monstrous to everyone around me for reasons that I had imagined. So I had two options as far as I could tell: give up on the fact-finding mission altogether or double down. And I refused to look stupid at the end of all of this, so I was willing to go to any length to make sure my wife did. The evidence was there, I just had to find it. If I wasn't able to dig up anything, well, that's because I hadn't tried hard enough. So I dug in. And then finally, February 2021, my efforts paid off. And I found the smoking gun. And so obviously incriminating were the text messages that I'd found that it never crossed my mind she would maintain her innocence. But that's what happened. She stuck to her guns, insisting that I was just jealous and paranoid. She told me that I was misinterpreting the conversations, which, by the way, I had screenshotted and quoted verbatim from her phone. And she ended our conversation with the ubiquitous "we're just friends" line. Just friends don't have sexually explicit conversations with one another. So ironically, it was this attempt to gaslight me that served to restore faith that I wasn't imagining things, misinterpreting things, or reading into things to fit some narrative that I had crafted. It was another 2 months or so before I discovered and hacked a secret social media account that she had set up after the last discovery. I found more of the same. I confronted her again, and this time she confessed to the affair. Although her initial admissions were very much abridged, the few details she offered were such that I knew there was more yet to be revealed. And so I embarked on one final year of intensive investigation. And whereas I'd been an all-star snooper prior to this, I became a Hall of Famer after. That next year was replete with vague trickle truth disclosures, each of which were delivered with a solemn oath that I had been told everything. As more information came out, behavioral patterns began to emerge, and it was evident that this sort of thing had been occurring throughout our entire marriage in one form or another, to one degree or another. And that over the years, the frequency, the severity, and the riskiness of her behavior had been on a steady incline. This behavior was beginning to look a lot like drug and alcohol addiction. Progressive, chronic, potentially fatal. Is my wife a freaking sex addict? Is this an addiction? Is that even a thing? Is sex addiction, is that a thing? I freaking hoped so, because for real, that would explain a few things, right? That would mean that my wife wasn't just an awful person. It would mean that she was sick, that she had a disease. And however thrilling that news was for me, and yes, it was really good news to me, she was likely to be somewhat more nonplussed. And so I read up on sex addiction and thought about how I might break the news to her. You guys, I even created a visual aid to reinforce the behavioral patterns and hopefully avoid any impression that I was working just off of a hunch. This is funny, y'all. This is sad, but this is funny too. The visual aid that I created, I graphed the frequency of all of her acting out behavior that I was aware of at the time, chronologically along the x-axis and according to the relative severity and risk of her behavior along the y-axis, to visually depict the accelerated frequency, severity, and riskiness of her behavior over the course of our marriage. And it wasn't until I began thinking about the story while I was preparing this talk that I became aware of the ironic nature of that graph. I had created it in order to illustrate how sick she was. And it actually painted every bit as clear a picture of how sick I was. We entered recovery, and by March 2022, I was 4 months or so into my program, and she was 7 or 8 months into hers. She had a sponsor. She was going to meetings. She was calling people. She was taking calls. She was working the steps. And she was writing it all down. And while she was sleeping, I was reading it all. This is her freaking recovery work, guys. That kind of behavior boggles the mind. If your mind is not boggled by that, your mind is unboggleable. After a few months of monitoring her recovery journals and her step work, she finally wrote down something that was useful to me, which was a list of her acting out partners, plural. Everyone whom I thought would be on there was, as well as a few more that I had known nothing about up to that point, one of whom was my best friend. I didn't take that well. The hours, weeks, months that followed were the absolute worst that I'd ever lived. Attempting to capture in spoken form that the pain that you feel after something like this is an exercise in futility. I am certain that there is something more painful than this. I just have not experienced it. I never felt such anger, shame, humiliation, sadness, or despair. And I'd never behaved so outrageously or monstrously to another human being. Behaviorally, I'd gone down about as far as I could go. My bottom was in sight, but emotionally and spiritually speaking, I had further yet to go. It was about that time that I was, per usual, going through her things, when I found a letter that she had written to me that I don't think she ever intended to deliver. In her letter, she apologized for hurting me and for the destruction she caused in our marriage. She hoped that somehow I could heal and that together we could heal and that our marriage might be repaired. But she confessed that she didn't think it likely apart from my willingness to forgive her and to work on my own recovery. Up to that point, I wasn't aware what my illness was, nor was I interested in working toward its remission. I was interested in working towards hers. I was intrusive, invasive, and obnoxious about it. But she stayed the course and worked her program despite my interference. And I watched resentfully for the better part of a year as she began to recover, gaining momentum along the way, and doing so without reference to me. Why was I resentful about that? It was me that, quote, suggested she enter recovery. I wanted her to get well, and she was achieving precisely the results that I'd hoped she would. Her recovery was working for her, and it brought her to the point where she was ready to let go and move on without me, which she noted in her letter. It read a bit like an ultimatum at the time, but I don't see it as such now. It was more a lamentation, an expression of grief. She had, it seemed, begun to mourn the end of our marriage. It was a simple, poignant, profound letter, and it was the saddest thing that I'd ever read. And it changed something in me. Whereas before I had been distressed over her lack of empathetic response to my pain, I was now distressed over my own lack of empathy for her. I now realized that I had hurt her every bit as much as she had hurt me, and for the first time, I recognized my own culpability. I couldn't have told you then what I'm about to say now, but the more that I looked at her, the more I wanted what she had. I'd never seen a person who had what I wanted. For sure, there were some guys in the program whom I could tell were living sober lives, but what I saw in them was the result of a lot of hard work. I didn't see the hard work that went into it. So for all I knew, they were always like that. But with my wife, I saw the transformation. I saw her progressive victory over her chronic disease, one that I knew to have been actively, aggressively trying to kill her. I saw outward evidence of this inward transformation, and so I knew it was possible. She was the first person about whom I could say, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And after reading that letter, I got to work. I didn't do anything special, y'all. I just what anybody else in S-Anon's ever done to recover. I called my sponsor. I worked the steps, went to meetings. I shared at meetings. I led some meetings. I went to conferences. I sponsored some guys. A speaker share here and there. I started to get better. But I didn't realize as it was happening that it was happening. Somewhere in the big book, I think, we're told that it's likely others will notice a change in us before we recognize it in ourselves. And that was certainly true in my case. I'd been in the program about 15 months when my son asked me to tell him about recovery. My son, who had run away from home twice to get away from me, and who, because of my intolerable behavior, had threatened me with physical violence on numerous occasions, this kid saw something in me that he wanted and asked me to share that with him. And it's because of the change that he saw in me that we were able to have that conversation. And because of that conversation, that he entered recovery. And because he entered recovery, that everyone in my home was in recovery. And because everyone in my home was in recovery, that he began referring to our home as a house of recovery. And that's when I realized that I was different, that I had changed. So in S-Anon, emotional sobriety is what we strive to obtain and maintain. And that term, in my experience, has been a little tricky for folks to define, but here's how I explain it. Emotional sobriety isn't about controlling your emotions, but about not letting them control you. So in this sense, it's my response to my emotions that determine my sobriety. In other words, how do I react? How do I act when I feel a particular way? And it's my ability to control my response to my emotions that helped me through a somewhat recent scenario that old Matt would have lost his shit over. My wife spoke alongside me in Colorado, Golden, Colorado, about a year ago. And when we prepare talks like that, as part of our process, we have the other one read through our notes to make suggestions for clarification, inclusion, exclusion, etc. And as I went through her notes for her talk, I read a story that she was to share about her recent struggle after a trigger, which had her on the verge of relapse. And I'm not going to lie, I got real anonic real quick. But after that, I was grateful that she felt safe enough to ask me to read her notes, and I thanked her for sharing it. And that's it. That was my response to the discomfort I felt about her trigger and her subsequent fantasies of relapse. Gratitude. If I had read something like that a few years ago, 100%, I would have gone into obsession mode and conducted a marathon interrogation about the who's, the what's, the whens of the trigger, and the acting out fantasy that ensued. Oh, please, do tell me more, honey. But today I realize there's nothing I can do for her or myself by meddling in her affairs. She's an addict. Of course she gets triggered. And she fantasized about relapse. So what? When I read that story, I fantasized about relapse. Her triggers, her struggles, her fantasies, they're none of my business. And there's nothing I can do about them. She's got a program for that. And even if she didn't, there's still nothing I could do about it. And it would be no less none of my business. When I got to work on this emotional sobriety stuff, I realized pretty quickly that if I was to obtain and maintain emotional sobriety, I had to get out of everybody's business. We S-Anons are plagued with this obsession to troubleshoot the way other people think, feel, and behave. I had to learn to allow my family and my fellows the dignity of thinking for themselves and acting on their own behalf. If I find myself faced with a problem and I ask myself whether it's any of my business, there's a 99% chance that the answer is no. That sounds an awful lot like none of my damn business. It's not my pig. It's not my farm. And to paraphrase the great Hank Williams Jr., if you were minding your own business, you wouldn't be minding mine. If you were minding your own business, you'd be busy all the time. I've been on planet Earth for 43 years, almost 44, and I've had a few arguments along the way. Never once did an argument result in a favorable outcome for me, even when I was right. And what that person thinks is none of my business anyway, which we've established. So I exercised my right to keep my damn mouth shut. Only lawyers win arguments, y'all. And since having an argument won't change the way mustard tastes, I declined to participate. You know, those of us in recovery, we're the lucky few of the millions of sick and suffering children of God. We've stumbled through the doors of recovery and have experienced the hope that these programs offer, found the relief that these principles provide. We have a solution right in front of us, numbered 1 through 12, in the order that we ought to take them, nice and simple like. They have provided a roadmap to recovery for millions of addicts and anons since they were first published 85, 86 years ago. And my life has turned out so profoundly different than it ought to have, thanks to the 12-step work of millions who came before me. I am both privileged and honored to carry that message today. It is among the most important work that I will ever do. I came to S-Anon hopeless, a lost cause as far as I was concerned, and as I share with you today, I can say without reservation that I've recovered from the effects upon me of someone else's sexaholism. That doesn't mean that my insanity doesn't stop by unannounced from time to time. It means that when it does, I lean into my program instead of into my disease. That's recovered, and that's pretty badass, y'all. It's because of S-Anon that I've had a shift in perspective, that today I can say that my wife's sexaholism is the best thing that's ever happened to me. And that apart from it, I'd still just be an asshole with no idea anything should be done about it. Although I've come a long way, there's still quite a bit of work to do. But I'm grateful that I have this paradigm for living within which I can do said work. I look forward to working my program of recovery 24 hours at a time until the day that I die, because it works, y'all. So I'll keep coming back. I'm Matt D. from St. Louis. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for sharing your story, this experience, strength, and hope with us. I felt the hope, I felt the experience and the strength, and I'm so grateful for your willingness to share that. I've written down several questions for you. If anybody in the live audience has a question for Matt, please type it in the chat. If you want me to not read your first name when I ask the question, just put anonymous or direct message me, and I'll get to those questions also. But Matt, what I want to start out here with is, your story consists of you doing a lot of how did you put it? Snooping and spying and stalking type behaviors. With the suspicion that, hey, she's going around behind my back. Is your experience any different for somebody who the bomb is just dropped and they had no idea how to go about it? What is the difference in getting into recovery from those two perspectives of a sexaholic and an S-Anon?
Help me out there with more information. I spent 10 years looking for what I thought was the truth, that smoking gun. I'm not sure what you're asking. So
let's say that, somebody comes into the rooms for the first time a week after disclosure, and it was, 10 years had gone by and they had no clue, and the bomb was dropped. Hey, I've been cheating on you for 10 years without any snooping or anything like that.
Yeah, Justin, thank you for asking that. I'll say this. This is hard to say. This is a relatively new perspective for me. I've been working on my recovery in some other ways recently. And when I look back at the insanity of those 10 years, my wife is divorced from that. In other words, I don't see her behavior anymore. I see my own. The insanity that I went through, I see that as what I did to myself. It's peculiar because I don't even see her as part of that anymore. So after after discovery, I see the trauma that came, and she's a part of that, but I don't blame her for anything that came before that. I made myself crazy. So there's a difference. If you haven't made yourself crazy up to that point, God bless you. I did that to myself, but afterwards, I mean, it's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. My sponsor was in the Gulf War, and he had PTSD after that, and he explains the symptoms that he went through after discovery as being very, very similar, almost identical. Look, if you're going through that, talk to somebody. Talk to somebody in this program. Talk to somebody professionally. Talk to somebody. You're gonna go crazy. You can go crazy the way that I went crazy and drive yourself crazy, like to the point of suicide. Or you can talk to people who've been there. I was so afraid of talking to people because I had so much shame about somebody else's behavior that I was on the verge of death, literally. And it's only because of this program that I made it out alive, I think.
Hey, Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that experience, that advice, I guess, is a non-recovery word to say. That suggestion to seek help and connection is so vital in these situations. Next question comes from an anonymous member of our audience here. This person says, are you only doing S-Anon? Lots of what you shared fits into CODA or SLA anorexia also. I'm curious if the focus on you has been if any of that has been brought up.
Yeah, no, S-Anon is not my only program. With 25 or 30 minutes, it's hard to delve into everything. I was an alcoholic and a drug addict long before I was an Anon, long before I was, I guess, a practicing Anon, if you will. Sexaholism was the rule in my family, so was alcoholism and drug addiction. I would say that I was probably a full-fledged alcoholic by the time I was 19 or 20. I brought that into my marriage and drug addiction as well. It's alcoholism and drug addiction that fueled my obsession, in part, mostly, I would say, that fueled my obsession with my wife's behavior. I became addicted to Adderall while I was working through my master's degree. And I learned that I didn't have to sleep anymore. That gave me all kinds of time to snoop, to go through her shit. While she was sleeping, like I said, I went through her shit. And I would go 2 weeks at a time without sleeping, just snooping. So there's that. Those two things, alcoholism and drug addiction, are relatively new things that I'm working on. When I hooked up with my sponsor, I told him that I had all of these things. I'm not a sexaholic. Thank God, he spared me there. But I've got all the other addictions. I told my sponsor about that. And I said, what do? I tried working all of these programs at once. And I said, I don't have the time for this. And he said, work on the one that you think will kill you first. And so I worked on S-Anon because I was suicidal. And with emotional sobriety, I didn't have the emotional reasons any longer to drink or to use drugs. So at that point, I was just physically addicted to them. And that was a whole nother part of my recovery. It's another mountain to climb one that I'm still working on to this day. Not perfect at it at this point, but we're working on it. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you for going into that, Matt, and sharing vulnerable. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there came a point in your wife's recovery where you went, you know what, I want what she has. Um, so the question I have comes from the side of the sexaholic, you know. And if I'm working my program and my wife is not, and she doesn't want what I have, what does that say about me? But what I want to say about that was your wife deemed in your eyes as pretty much perfect at that point, or were there still flaws and everything? And you said, you know what, with flaws and everything, I still want what she has.
Yeah, no, not perfect at all. Just that what she was doing was working. I still at that point I hadn't forgiven her for anything. There was no amends that she had tried to make. Everything was still forgive here, but everything was still very fucked up. But she was different. She wasn't all the way different, but she was different enough that she wasn't putting up with my nonsense. She was creating boundaries. She was working on herself, and it was clear that she was doing it. So she wasn't perfect, but with somebody like me who was monstrous to her, I mean, you guys, I'm working on a project now where I'm delving into some really old childhood stuff, some early recovery stuff. And as part of that project, I've been going through my old phones and looking at my text messages, specifically the stuff that I sent to my sponsor early on. And you wouldn't believe the ridiculous things that came out of my mouth to her and to him about her. It was vulgar. It was verbal violence. I've never put my hands on her, but there's other kind of violence, and that's what I did. So she wasn't perfect, but in the midst of all of that nonsense that I was doing, her program was working. And everything in my life up to that point was so chaotic. My childhood, my teenage years, my early adulthood, my marriage. And she was with a guy like me who was, at that point, the most monstrous person that I knew. And she was recovering. It worked. So I wanted that.
Thank you for sharing that. So I'm speaking not from my own personal experience, but from a sponsee's personal experience. That sponsee's spouse expects absolute perfection from that sponsee before anything is not forgiven, but moved through. What do you have to say to the potential Anon who may be in that place saying you have to be absolutely perfect in every way, absolutely 100% honest every single second, and everything like that before I'll even consider any sort of work of my own?
Yeah, go ahead and get divorced and don't marry again. Because, I mean, you're never going to find a human being that can do that. Nobody can do that. I mean that in jest, like, I'm not saying actually get divorced, but, nobody is capable of that. I expected that of my wife, perfection, complete honesty, rigorous honesty before I even knew what such a thing was. And I would say, look at yourself first. Are you perfect? Can you live up to the standards that you expect of somebody else? Because I had those standards, and there's no way I could have lived up to them. I expected that of her and not of myself. And if she ever confronted me about anything, it was classic projection. It was raging, it was ranting, raving, yelling at her, throwing her transgressions up in her face as I imagined them or as they actually existed. It's irrelevant, but never thought to look at myself. When in the big book, it talks about if you're disturbed, the problem is within you. If I'm disturbed about somebody, I look at them as a sick person, and I say the sick man's prayer for them. And then I say it for myself. because I am sick too. I'm no better. I'm no worse. We're all sick and suffering children of God, whether we have an addiction or not. If you can honestly, and this is this is why we take inventories. This is what our fourth step is about. This is what 8 and 9 is about, right? We take an inventory of ourself. And as Anons, that's super important because we're so focused on other people's behavior. And, when I take on a sponsee, I let them talk about, their spouses for a little bit. And then I'm just like, okay, that's enough, because what is wrong with you? That is the only way to serenity. What is wrong with you? And I just won't tolerate talking about anything else. Not that I won't tolerate it. Forgive me, it's harsh, but we're not talking about her anymore. We're talking about you. That is the way to serenity. That's what I found. My problem is me. And if you're married to a sexaholic or an addict, your problem is not the sexaholic or the addict. Your problem is you. You can have serenity married to a sexaholic or an addict if you want it, by looking at yourself, taking your own inventory.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Question from DP from our live audience. DP says, how has your spiritual practice evolved in recovery? Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support, or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead.
It's a great question. Thanks, buddy. When I was 19, I became a Christian, and around about 24 years old, 25 years old, after I married my wife, I went to Bible college to become a preacher. That didn't go so well. I was an addict. And there were so many secrets from my past, so many secrets at that point from my present. It didn't work. And I'm still a Christian, and I won't ever take that back. I'm devout in that sense, but the church doesn't deal with what we deal with in these rooms. And dealing with people that are really, really struggling, dealing with people that are on the verge of suicide because of what they've gone through, what's happened. It's a whole different world, in the church, people hide their shit. I did. They do. But in these rooms, you teach people to be rigorously honest. And it's a whole different thing. I pray for people now because I know they're on the brink of disaster, They're at the gates of insanity or death. And I pray for them because I have to, because I was there. I never was, even in Bible college, never much of a prayer. I didn't quite understand it, I guess, but now I have no option. I pray for these people, these men that I deal with. It's life or death for us sometimes.
Good. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. All right. Next question comes from Jacqueline from our live audience. Jacqueline says, hey, Matt, thanks for your share. It's awesome to know you and your wife. Once your primary addiction is no longer killing you, how do you figure out which next 12 step to do?
What's the next one that's going to kill you? Thanks, Jacqueline, for that. Yeah. Once I got sober, emotionally sober in S-Anon, it was the next thing. And with the drug and alcohol addiction, and it can kind of fluctuate. alcohol was my biggest thing at that point. And it took for me, before I even tried getting sober there, it took for me a really, really bad hangover, like 3 or 4 day hangover, before I was like, this is capable of killing me too. So that's that, whatever's the next thing that's coming down the pike. Drug and alcohol addiction, they're very similar. I won't speak for everybody. If you work something like NA, they deal with both drug and alcohol addiction. They talk about alcohol addiction as a drug. So there's that. But if you don't have, say, drug addiction, if you just have alcohol addiction, it may be helpful to work a program that's specifically for alcohol addiction, because you find people that are like you, that understand what you're going through, the way that you're going through it. But I would suggest for anybody, work in a program like Codependence Anonymous, where you can deal with codependency. Most of us have codependent behaviors. Most humans do, I would say. And it was keying in on that changed my life in such a way that I was able to look at myself and deal with my own other problems without projecting, without making it my wife's problem or my son's problem or anybody else's. I have these other problems and I got to deal with those. I didn't work Codependence Anonymous specifically. I worked S-Anon, which deals with it in a different way, but codependency is a huge problem for a lot of people. And if you can plug into something like Coda and really work that, I think that will help you get to the point where you can tackle these other physical addictions, of which I think, I'm not a sexaholic, but of which I think SA is probably one of those things. And Justin, you can correct me there if you think I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right with that. All right, we have another question come in from our live audience. This is from an anonymous person. As someone in recovery from codependency and Al-Anon, I know I am the problem in living in the home that I did. I didn't have a relationship with my only sibling. The disease in my family did not help us learn to support each other. We don't speak at all, still to this day. It's very painful and stressful. Would you be willing to share briefly about how or if recovery has helped you with your siblings and your biological family of origin?
Yeah, absolutely. It has helped. Not with every one of them, but it has helped. I had relationships. I'll say there's two of my. I'm one of 12. There's two of my family members that I was pretty close to. Another one that I was very close to, and of those 11 siblings, just those three that I was close enough to really speak about. The ones that I wasn't close to, we didn't talk then. We don't really talk now. There's no animosity, nothing that kept us from talking. We just didn't. But my two sisters, it has helped tremendously. I was long into the program actually, and this is tough to talk about, right? Because I thought I was doing great. I thought I was like smooth sailing, and I think within like a week, I had a friend of mine ghost me for being non-communicative. One of my sisters ghosted me for being non-communicative. Another sister told me that, she wasn't ready to ghost me, but she felt the same. And a brother, and the one that I'm the closest to, ghosted me for being non-communicative. Right? I thought I was doing great. And within 7 days, 10 days time, 4 people didn't want to talk to me anymore. And not that I was rude or disrespectful or whatever, but I had so much going on in recovery. I was so focused on that I lost focus on my family. And it was the principles of this program that helped me to become aware of that, first of all, and make amends for that. And I have made amends, and I've learned to be vulnerable, not just with the people in my program, but with them. That's a difficult thing, being vulnerable with your friends and your family, because I only really learned how to be vulnerable with the men in my program because of our shared trauma, right? That bonds you. So it was the shared trauma. My sponsor was relentless about that shit. Talk about your feelings and all this stuff. And guys, we just in general don't talk about our feelings. I didn't know what my feelings were. I processed everything through rage and alcohol and drugs and resentment, right? That's what I knew. I knew rage, or I knew anger rather, which was expressed through rage. But I didn't really know what joy was, what happiness was, any of that stuff. And I got this feelings wheel from him, and I thought it was the goofiest damn thing I'd ever seen. But it actually helped. Like, what are you feeling right now? I don't know. Let me look. And I would go around this wheel and try to pick out the thing that I felt. Because we're not good at that. I would say, and it's not just a male problem, but a people problem. We're not really great at identifying what our feelings are and healthily communicating them. But through this program, I was able to do that, and I'm closer now to those two sisters. My brother is very much an addict in all the senses, but is receptive to some of this recovery stuff. I got to be careful with him. We find a solution, and then it's sometimes our problem goes from not wanting to say a word about what we've gone through, or at least in my case, not wanting to speak a word of what we've gone through, to learning how to temper some of that. And when I found out he was interested in what I was going through, I wanted to tell him everything. And at some point he's like, fuck off, stop trying to program me, bro. I went too far with him. So it does definitely help. Be careful, plant some little seeds, see if they pick them up, see if those things grow. And if they do, just be careful about it, but it absolutely does help. I have better relationships with the three of them than I ever have in my life.
Good. Thanks for sharing that, and I'm glad that things are healing up, and we'll look to be continuing in that trajectory. So as we start wrapping up here, Matt, do you have any final words of wisdom for us before we start closing out?
Yeah. Mind your business. Mind your business. Stay out of other people's. That goes so far in recovery. Mind your damn business. Not my pig, not my farm type of thing. That was huge in my recovery. Just staying on my side of the street. My side of the street is very large, and I don't have to go far to get there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Matt, for that powerful and very good Rico 12 speaker meeting. If you in the live audience, if you still had questions or would like to connect with Matt somehow, please contact me at rico12pod@gmail.com, and I'll facilitate that connection. And if you haven't already done so yet, please consider rating and reviewing Rico 12 on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's a powerful way to help work Step 12 and get this message out to more people who may need it. Next Friday, we will be hearing from Donna, who will be a first-time Rico 12 speaker, and I'm excited to hear from her. We are continuing to add in a speaker here and there over the next few months, but there's still several weeks that are open. If your higher power is leaning on you and saying, hey, you need to speak on this. You got 20 minutes, 25 minutes of something to speak about. I need you to speak on this. Reach out to me. Send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com. We'll get you in on that. Matt, why don't you take us out with the Lord's Prayer as you lined up with us?
Happy to do that. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen, amen. Everybody remember, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
You're here.
I feel that I'm lucky to have made it at all through the complicated maze. I did it all to myself, but but finally left behind that constant pain. What more can I do but to show up here each day? I'd like you to be proud of me, but first I need to be proud of myself. So I'm taking back my heart, taking back my heart this time. Taking back my heart, taking back my heart this time. What's so damn attractive about some medicated haze? I've lied to myself, it feels like 1,000 times. I was going through some messed up passing phase. What more can I do than get up, get over, find a better way? Someday I'll be proud of me. I'll never give up on myself again. So I'm taking back my heart, I'm taking back my heart this time. I'm taking back my heart, I'm taking back my heart this time. Taking back my heart, I'm taking back my heart this time. So I'm taking back my heart, taking back my heart this time. Ba 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 da, ba 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 da, ba ba da ba da, ba 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 da.